Welcome to Speak to Learn English with Katarina. Today we'll be talking about exercise. The idea behind my videos is that you get a bit more speaking practice in each week by having a short conversation with me. I'll ask open-ended questions on a topic and I encourage you to pause the video and say your answers out loud. If you can't or just really don't want to say your answer, I encourage you to do the next best thing, which is write it down. And maybe you can even put it in the comments below. Either way, if there's a word that you'd like to include in your answer, I encourage you to take a moment and look that word up so that you can add it to your English vocabulary. I have another video all about why speaking is beneficial to help you improve your English, which I'll link in the description below. For now, let's get into today's topic, exercise. Here's my first question for you. What are the benefits of exercise? Go ahead and take a moment to pause the video and say your answer to this question. Here's a sample answer. Exercise is beneficial in a lot of ways. Exercising regularly can help you sleep better, make your muscles and bones stronger, improve your mental health, and possibly slow memory loss as we age and get older. Exercise also helps to reduce your risk of certain diseases and increases the chances that you'll live longer. Often we hear about exercise as a way to help us lose weight, which may be true, but it's interesting that there's some research that indicates that exercise alone is actually not a good tool to lose weight. But then again, there are lots of success stories of people who have lost weight and credit their success to exercise. Now that you have your answer and my answer, how do they compare? For those interested in grammar, what verb tense did you use in your answer? You may have noticed that I used the simple present tense with verbs like is and helps. The simple present tense is appropriate here because we're discussing general truths, which is one of the places where we use the simple present tense. Now, before we go on to our next question, let's talk a bit about the vocabulary related to exercise, or certain vocabulary words. There are lots of words, and I hope that you'll find some other new words as you work through your answers with me here in the video. Today I have some terms to compare and contrast. The first one is, what's the difference between a squat and a deep squat? Here's a picture of a squat that you might see someone at the gym doing. The top portion of her legs, the thighs, are parallel to, or in other words, at the same angle as, the ground. This is the type of squat that people often do when they're working out to build muscle. Now, what about the deep squat? Here's a picture of that. You can see that her legs are completely bent at the knee, so that her thighs are touching the lower part of her legs at the back, which is called the calf. This version takes more mobility and flexibility of the hips, knees, and ankles to accomplish, and more strength in the lower body. For our next one, let's talk about bicycles or bikes. You can ride a bike like this man is doing in the picture. In American English, when I hear someone talking about riding a bike, this is what I think of, where you're on a bicycle, probably outdoors. And then something slightly different. What do you see in this picture? These women are on bicycles that don't move forward. They're called stationary bicycles, and they're probably being led through the exercise or instructed by another person in a class. So what do we call that type of class? Is it a bicycle class? No. It can have two names, either a cycling class or a spin class. For our last vocabulary comparison, let's talk about two of the ways people exercise. Some people like to do cardio, which is short for cardiovascular exercise. That can include running, riding a bike, or other exercises where the focus is on strengthening the heart and getting the blood moving. Other people like to focus on lifting weights, either with weight machines, like you can see here, or free weights, like you can see here. Some people do a mix of both. Now that we've discussed some vocabulary, here's my next question for you. What types of exercise do you like to do? Again, I'll give you a moment to hit that pause button and say your answer out loud. I like to go walking and I enjoy Zumba classes or kind of like dance fitness classes. Some people might say other things like I like to go jogging or lift weights or play sports or swim, which are all great answers. There's no wrong answer, really. So now let's talk about my next question. What do you dislike doing for exercise? Again, I'll give you a moment to pause and either say or write down your answer. In my case, I personally dislike treadmills and stationary bikes. If I'm going to do cardio, I'd rather do it outside. So here's our next question. What are your fitness goals? Or in other words, what is your goal when it comes to exercising? I'll give you a second to pause so that you can practice your English speaking skills and say your answer out loud. My fitness goals are to slim down and tone up. Or, in other words, slim down means that you want to lose fat, and tone up means that you want to strengthen or gain muscle. I also want to increase the range of motion in my muscles and joints, which is another way of saying I want to be more flexible and increase my mobility. Now, here's our last question. What is your exercise routine? Go ahead and pause, and you can take a moment to think about your answer and then say it out loud or write it down. In my case, I go on walks a few days a week. I'd like to increase the frequency actually and become more consistent. And I do some stretching in the morning and evenings. I'd probably like to work up to adding some weightlifting, but probably with body weight movements or resistance bands, which are other ways we can exercise. When we talk about our routine of what we're actually doing on a regular basis, this is another place where the correct verb tense to use is the simple present tense, because that's what we use when we talk about habits or things we usually do. So before we go to our review, I'd like to talk about an aspect of this topic that I find very interesting, which is the idea of just making an effort to include more movement and more varied movement throughout the day, as well as doing exercises that are smaller, but that their focus is to increase the mobility or the ability to move of our bodies. A book I recommend on this topic is this book, Move Your DNA by Katie Bowman. I've read this book several times and I got it several years ago. I find it extremely interesting. She has a short video that explains the concept, which she calls nutritious movement. I'll link to it in the description below if you'd like to see more. I'll also include my link to the book if you're interested in reading it, and it's also available as an audiobook, which would allow you to get in some more listening practice. So now let's review. Today we talked about exercise. How do you feel like you did in your responses? What words did you look up to include in your answers? I would recommend that you take a moment to jot those new words down somewhere so that you can review them tomorrow or next week and make sure that they can continue as a part of your English vocabulary. Do you remember the meanings of the words that we discussed together? Let's review them. They were squat, deep squat, ride a bike, spin class or cycling class, lift weights, do cardio. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to learn English with me, check out the link to my teaching profile in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.